Chapter 3. Elena. Elena knew it wasn't smart or rational to trust a boy she'd just met. Aegon certainly didn't trust him, but Quinn seemed sincere, and she didn't really have a lot of other options. She'd proven that she was capable of defending herself if attacked, so she was pretty sure he wouldn't try anything. Elena could hear the voices of the guards from Harbour Ridge telling her that she was making a bad decision in trusting any male. But where else would they sleep tonight? Her intuition told her that she could trust him, and she'd never been wrong when she followed her intuition. Elena had studied him while he'd been unconscious. The boy looked to be about her age, maybe a cycle older. He was a bit grungy, dirt smeared on his forehead and both of his hands, but his skin was a soft olive colour. Elena knew that following a stranger back to his home in the woods was risky at best, but she didn't have a lot of other options. Plus, he seemed like he was also a formidable opponent. She felt confident in the belief that they wouldn't be attacked by any outside forces, although she wondered a little at his sanity, considering he'd just had a very vocal and one-sided conversation with his fox dog, in which he had seemed to be waiting and responding, as though the animal was talking to him. One night, and they'd be headed into town and off on the next step in finding a new life. A life outside the school, the only home she'd ever known. No, she thought. Stop that right now. Self-pity won't accomplish anything. Elena walked a few paces behind Quinn, with Aegon curled protectively around her neck, head up and fully alert. He wasn't happy with her, but he saw the logic in her choice and begrudgingly agreed. Quinn had said his home was close by, but it felt like they'd been walking for a while. I thought you said it was close. Close would have been a 5 to 10 minute walk. We've been going for nearly an hour. She was anxious. In reality, she had no idea how long they'd actually been walking, but it was definitely more than 5 minutes. See that creek over there? He stopped walking and pointed ahead of them and to the east a bit. No, not really. I think I can hear it, though. It was much too dark to see, especially through all the trees, but if she listened closely, Elena was pretty sure she could hear the babble of water slowly flowing over rocks and brushing against low-hanging limbs. We live right next to that creek. We're close, I promise. Just a bit farther and we'll be home. Quinn began walking in the direction he'd been pointing, veering slightly more to the east. Why do you live out here, so far from town? Don't you need people? For food, supplies, companionship? Elena didn't understand his isolationist lifestyle. At Harbour Ridge, you were never alone. She'd always shared a bedroom with at least 3 other girls, and there were people everywhere she went. All meals were served in the Great Hall, and everyone ate together. Time was spent in class, the library, or your room, all of which were always filled with people. The thought of being alone terrified her, and here he was, clearly intent on having a great deal of space between him and anyone else. Don't you get lonely? No, people annoy me. I prefer the companionship of Lyra and the quiet peace of the woods. He didn't say any more until they got to the creek. Here we are. It was dark, and all Elena could see were dense woods and the small creek. What do you mean? You just live on the creekside? I thought you said you had shelter, an actual home. This isn't any safer than where we were. Quinn just chuckled and started rustling around in some bushes beside the water. He pulled back a branch and revealed a decent-sized hut hidden behind, or maybe within, the thicket. His fox, Lyra, ran in first, and seconds later there was a fire burning in the stone circle at the centre of the space. The hut was surprisingly roomy and cosy, with plenty of room for a large cooking fire. An opening in the centre of the roof allowed the smoke from the fire to escape, and a pallet made of furs near the back served as his bed. This is really nice. She tried not to sound as shocked as she felt, but failed miserably. How did you find this place? It's the perfect hideout. As she said it, she realised that was exactly what it was, a hideout. Who was he hiding from? She wondered. Elena thought better of voicing that one. She was curious to know more about this strange boy, but she feared what she might learn, Harbour Ridge always looked down on magept, those who were magically inept, and made them seem ignorant, selfish, and ultimately conniving cheats. She knew that was probably an inaccurate representation of non-magical humanity as a whole, but weren't all stereotypes rooted in some level of truth? It's a nice little place, safe from the weather and prying eyes. We've been here for nearly a full solar cycle now, and it suits our purposes. Fresh water right outside, plenty of game to hunt, and food to gather. We can live very happily here for some time. To answer your questions from before, I don't need the town or its people, because we're perfectly capable of taking care of ourselves out here. We do go into town, rarely, to trade and stock up on the few things we can't find or make on our own, but I don't like the crowds, and they aren't overly fond of us either. He walked over to the fire and started unloading things from pockets she hadn't noticed he had. A hunting knife as big as her forearm, some rope, a rabbit carcass, berries, something green that she couldn't see clearly enough to identify, a large water skin and 2 dented metal flasks. He took his cloak off and hung it on a small branch from one of the trees he used to make the walls of his hut, and reached out his hand to take hers. Elena, not comfortable enough to disrobe in the slightest, gently shook her head and wandered over to the fire instead. She analysed their new temporary travel companions. Quinn picked up his hunting knife along with a large, flat stone, rubbed some sort of oily bar onto the face of the stone, and began slowly sliding the blade across the wet stone. The steady, repetitive motion and the sound of the blade on the stone seemed like an almost meditative habit for him. He kept his focus on the knife, giving Elena a chance to study his face further, drawing her attention to the long, thick blonde eyelashes that curtained his forest green eyes. She tried to be subtle in her observations of him, but he caught her staring when he pushed his blonde hair from his brow as he finished working with the knife. Quinn tried, and failed, to hide a chuckle as he turned to the fire, placing a dented tin pail on a hook near the fire. Elena's focus shifted to the flames. How had Lyra started that fire? There were so many things she didn't know about this boy and his rust-coloured fox. What was she thinking coming back here with them? Aegon, still perched around her shoulders, nuzzled her ear and sent his thoughts into her mind. His words carried a suspicion that she shared. "There's something amiss with that fox. She's not what she appears." Elena just nodded. There wasn't enough room in this hut for her to voice her response without being overheard, and she wasn't sure how to respond. She was equally intrigued about Lyra. Elena decided that conversation was the best way to learn anything about anyone, and sitting here in silence would just make everyone more tense and solve nothing. "How long have you been living on your own? You said you've only been here for a cycle, right? Where were you before this? Do you have any family nearby?" "You sure do ask a lot of questions," he replied as he began to skin the rabbit. "I suppose. Questions are a great way to get to know someone." The sounds of the skin being removed from the rabbit's flesh made her nauseated, but she knew that showing weakness wouldn't do her any good. Instead, she decided to talk about herself and try to get him to open up some. "My mother always told me I ask too many questions and I'm too nosy, but how else will we learn if we don't have the courage to ask?" "Your mum sounds sweet." The sarcasm in his statement was clear, as well as the hint of jealousy and possibly sadness. She is a very busy woman. Having a child wasn't really a priority for her. Raising a child was simply too much work for her, on top of running the school and advising the king. She didn't have the patience or tolerance for children. It always amused me that she was the one running the school. You'd think it would be someone who actually liked children, wouldn't you? Elena knew she was telling too much about herself, but she couldn't help it. She was a nervous talker. Quinn dropped the knife and the half-skinned rabbit carcass, turning toward her abruptly and blurted, "Wait, your mother is the enchantress, the one who basically runs this whole damn country. What the hell's are you doing sleeping on the side of the road? You're practically royalty. If people knew who you were, you could be in a lot of danger. You shouldn't be all by yourself." "Don't yell at me. I didn't choose to be out there. If it were up to me, I'd still be at Harbour Ridge with my friends. Well, classmates, and the people I cared about. My mother kicked me out. She sent me away. I didn't have any other options." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let herself cry in front of this boy. He didn't know her. He didn't understand how she was feeling or what she'd been through. "I appreciate your willingness to help us, but if it's going to be a night of you chastising me, Aegon and I will find somewhere else to sleep." "I'm sorry." Quinn looked her in the eyes when he spoke, most likely to make sure she knew he meant every word. "I shouldn't have yelled at you. It's very risky to be out on your own, regardless of who you are, especially if you're someone important. I didn't mean to snap at you. I was just shocked that they would let you out of the safety and security of that fortress of a school so carelessly. Please, stay. Stay as long as you'd like." Elena nodded in acknowledgement of his words. She didn't trust her voice enough to respond without crying, and she really didn't want to let him see her tears.